"I can fix this mess," the little girl declared to hundreds of the millionaire's employees who couldn't get the engine on the table working. So, to humiliate her, the manager says he'll give her his job if she succeeds. But moments later, something incredible happens. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The $100,000 engine lay in pieces on the steel table, its components scattered like shards of a shattered dream. 100 specialized employees surrounded the equipment, their tense faces etched with despair, cold sweat beading on their foreheads. The heavy silence of the factory yard was broken only by the metallic clatter of tools thrown to the ground in frustration. The 30-year-old widowed millionaire watched the scene from a second-story window, his striking features drawn with anguish. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the papers that sealed the fate of his family business. The biggest contract in the company's history hinged on that engine functioning perfectly in less than 48 hours. His fortune, accumulated over years of Wall Street investments, seemed insignificant in the face of the looming threat of bankruptcy. The family business carried 3 generations of tradition and prestige in the industrial heartland of Detroit. His grandfather had built the empire from scratch. His father had expanded the business to other countries, and now he faced the very real possibility of being responsible for its destruction. His net worth wouldn't be enough to cover the losses if that contract fell through. Outside the chain-link fence, a tiny figure watched the commotion through the metal bars. The 4-year-old street urchin looked barely 2 due to her extreme frailty, her skeletal limbs barely supporting the weight of her own body. Her torn and dirty clothes barely covered her skin, marked by hunger and neglect. She had spent the entire morning scavenging for scraps in nearby dumpsters, but something about this activity had caught her attention. Her large, dark eyes were fixed on the disassembled engine, and a strange familiarity filled her small heart. It was as if each piece whispered secrets that only she could hear. Her small hands gripped the bars of the fence as she watched the grown men moving desperately around the machine. The arrogant and cruel plant manager barked contradictory orders at the employees, his sadistic nature manifesting in the way he humiliated those who couldn't solve the problem. He was known for his cruelty, finding pleasure in belittling others, especially when he felt threatened or insecure. "You're all incompetent," he bellowed, throwing a wrench to the ground with force. 30 years of combined experience, and you can't fix a simple engine. If this isn't resolved today, you're all out of a job tomorrow." The employees exchanged desperate glances. They had tried everything, followed every manual, consulted experts over the phone, but nothing worked. The engine had a complex defect that seemed to defy all logic of mechanical engineering. It was as if someone had deliberately created an impossible problem to solve. It was at this moment of maximum tension that the sweet but determined voice of the little girl cut through the air like a knife. "I can fix that engine!" she shouted through the fence, her childish voice echoing through the silent yard. The effect was instantaneous. 100 pairs of eyes turned to the fence, where the ragged child held the bars with her dirty little hands. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then laughter erupted like an avalanche of cruel mockery. "Look at this!" shouted one of the employees, pointing at the girl. "The little beggar wants to teach us how to work." "She must be hungry and delirious," laughed another, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Crazy kid thinking she can do what engineers can't." The cruel manager saw a perfect opportunity presenting itself before him. His eyes gleamed with malice as he approached the fence, a sadistic smile forming on his lips. This would be the perfect humiliation, using a vulnerable child as entertainment to relieve the tension of his employees. "Listen up, everyone!" he shouted, clapping his hands to get their attention. "The little beggar here says she can fix our engine. How about we make an interesting bet?" The employees gathered around, curious about what the manager was planning. He bent down to get on the same level as the girl through the fence, his cold eyes fixed on hers. "If you can fix that engine, I'll hand over my own job to you. But when you fail, I never want to see you hanging around our factory again. Do you accept the bet, kid?" The girl looked at the broken engine, then at the manager's cruel face, and finally at all the men watching her with disdain. Something deep inside her propelled her forward, an inexplicable certainty that she knew those parts better than anyone else there. "I accept," she replied, her voice firm despite the trembling that ran through her body. The laughter started again, even louder and crueler. The millionaire, who had come down to the yard upon hearing the commotion, watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and despair. He was willing to try anything, even if it meant allowing a street child to touch invaluable equipment. "Let her in," he said, his voice cutting through the laughter. "We have nothing left to lose." The metal gate creaked open, and the girl took her first hesitant steps into the factory yard. Her trembling legs could barely support her weight as she walked towards the table where the engine awaited. The employees formed a circle around her, whispering malicious comments and betting on how long it would take her to give up. "5 minutes and she'll run out crying," muttered an experienced welder, crossing his arms with disdain. "I bet she can't even lift the parts," laughed another, shaking his head in disbelief. The girl approached the steel table, her small, dirty hands trembling as she looked at the hundreds of scattered parts. The engine was completely disassembled, each component separated from the others in a confusion that seemed impossible to decipher. For any normal person, this would be an unsolvable puzzle, but for her, it was different. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Immediately, fragmented memories began to surface in her mind. Images of a dark and dusty workshop where she had spent her early years. The sound of tools working, the smell of oil and metal, the patient voice of an old man explaining how each part worked as if they were living creatures. When she opened her eyes again, something had changed. Her hands no longer trembled. With precise and sure movements, she began to touch each part, feeling its weight, texture, and purpose. It was as if each component whispered secrets directly into her ears, revealing exactly where it should be placed. The first screw was threaded with absolute perfection. Then the second, her small hands moved with a surgical precision that left the observers speechless. There was no hesitation, no trial and error. Each movement was calculated, each piece found its exact place, as if guided by an invisible force. The cruel manager, who had bet his career on the humiliation of the child, began to feel a chill in his stomach. His eyes narrowed as he watched the girl work, a growing anxiety taking over his chest. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible for a 4-year-old beggar to know more about engines than his specialized team. "It's just luck," he muttered to himself, wiping the sweat that was beginning to form on his forehead. "Soon she'll mess up and show that she's just a fake." But the girl kept working. Her small hands reached corners that adult fingers could barely touch. Her dirty nails removed microscopic debris that no one had noticed. It was as if she saw problems invisible to the trained eyes of the engineers. The millionaire approached the table, fascinated by what he was witnessing. His family business possessed assets built over 3 generations, with investments in stocks and applications that generated substantial dividends monthly. He had hired the best professionals, bought the most modern equipment, but he had never seen anything comparable to this demonstration of intuitive knowledge. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The circle of employees gradually closed, their mocking laughter giving way to nervous murmurs. The child showed no signs of doubt or fatigue. On the contrary, she seemed to gain confidence with each piece placed in the correct place. It was then that she found the real problem. Her small hands stopped on a specific component, a piece that seemed to be perfect to everyone's eyes, but which she knew had an internal defect. It wasn't something visible, but rather a microscopic flaw that only someone with extremely specific knowledge could detect. "This part is cracked inside," she said, her childish voice echoing through the silent yard. "That's why the engine doesn't work. It needs to be replaced." The head of maintenance, a man with 40 years of experience, approached with skepticism. He took the part from the girl's hands and examined it carefully under the light. To his trained eyes, it was perfect. There were no scratches, deformations, or signs of wear. "Girl, this part is new," he said, shaking his head. "It just came out of the packaging 3 days ago." The girl looked at him with her big, serious eyes. "The crack is in here," she insisted, pointing to a specific area. "You can't see it, but it's there. If you have a machine that can see inside things, you'll find it." The millionaire signaled for them to bring the industrial ultrasound equipment, an expensive machine that was rarely used for routine checks. When the result appeared on the screen, a sepulchral silence took over the yard. There was a microscopic crack exactly where the girl had indicated, invisible to the naked eye, but sufficient to cause the complete failure of the system. "Impossible," whispered the head of maintenance, his hands trembling as he held the report. "How did she detect this without equipment?" The girl didn't answer. She simply waited while they looked for a replacement part. When it arrived, she quickly examined it, made sure it was perfect, and installed it with the same surgical precision she had demonstrated throughout the process. 5 more minutes of concentrated work, and the engine was completely assembled. The girl took a step back, wiped her dirty hands on her own torn t-shirt, and looked at the millionaire. "You can turn it on now," she said simply. The businessman approached with trembling hands and activated the starting system. The engine roared to life with a perfection it had never achieved before. The sound was clean, powerful, without irregular vibrations or strange noises. It was as if the machine had been born again, working better than when it left the original factory. The shock was absolute. 100 specialized employees remained silent, unable to process what they had just witnessed. A street child had solved in 15 minutes a problem that had tormented them for days. The cruel manager felt his legs weaken. His reckless bet had backfired on him devastatingly. The humiliation he had planned for the girl now fell on his own shoulders, multiplied by 100. All the employees watched him, waiting for him to keep his word. "A deal is a deal," said the millionaire, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "You offered your job if she could fix the engine." She did. With his face red with anger and humiliation, the manager took his badge off his lapel and threw it at the girl's feet. "Congratulations, brat," he spat with venom. "Now you're an official employee of this company, but don't think this will last long." The threat in his voice was crystal clear. The girl had won the first battle, but a much larger war was just beginning. The following days turned the girl's life into a roller coaster of contradictory emotions. As the company's newest official employee, she received a small blue uniform that swallowed her fragile little body and a name tag that hung heavily around her thin neck. The millionaire had decided that she would work part-time, allowing her to demonstrate her abilities without overwhelming her delicate constitution. What no one expected was the silent revolution that began to happen at the factory. Machines that had been malfunctioning intermittently for months suddenly worked perfectly after the little girl touched them. Equipment considered obsolete came back to life with an efficiency that surprised even the most experienced technicians. It was as if she possessed a supernatural gift for understanding the language of machines. However, the former fired manager had not accepted his defeat with dignity. For the next 2 weeks, he hung around the bars near the factory, planting poisonous seeds of discontent among the workers. His narrative was convincing and cruel. A street urchin had stolen the job of a man with a family to support, and soon she would do the same to all of them. "You don't understand what's happening," he whispered to groups of employees during breaks. "That brat is a threat to all of us. If the boss finds out that a kid can do our work, why would he keep paying our salaries?" The poison spread slowly but effectively. Hostile glances began to follow the girl through the factory corridors. Conversations stopped abruptly when she approached. Important tools mysteriously disappeared from her workbench, forcing her to improvise even more creative solutions. The millionaire watched everything from his office on the second floor, torn between fascination and concern. His family business had been built on values of tradition and hierarchy. Accepting that an abandoned child possessed knowledge superior to that of his specialized team challenged convictions he had held since childhood. At the same time, he couldn't ignore the extraordinary results she produced. His nights became sleepless as he researched the girl's past. Contracts with private investigators consumed a significant portion of his net worth, but the information that came to him was fragmented and confusing. The child seemed to have emerged from nowhere, without official records, without a known family, without connections that explained her impossible knowledge. It was during one of these investigations that he discovered the first real clue. In the ruins of an old machine shop in the suburbs, torn down 2 years ago to make way for a strip mall, there were records of a man known only as the inventor. Neighbors remembered him as a misunderstood genius who worked with revolutionary prototypes but lived like a recluse. The connection became clearer when the millionaire found old documents in the company archives. The inventor had been his father's partner 3 decades ago, but a bitter dispute over patents and copyrights had resulted in his expulsion from the partnership. The man had left, taking with him technical secrets that could have transformed the company into a global powerhouse. Meanwhile, at the factory, the girl's situation deteriorated progressively. The employees' hostility manifested in subtle but cruel sabotage. Screws were deliberately loosened on equipment she had repaired, causing them to fail again and raising doubts about her competence. Her food was accidentally spilled during lunch, forcing her to work hungry. Worst of all was the emotional isolation. The girl, who had grown up alone but had never experienced active rejection, now faced the crushing weight of collective hostility. Her nights were spent huddled in a corner of the tool room, where the millionaire had improvised a small space for her to rest, crying silently while hugging a wrench as if it were a toy. It was on one of these nights that she began talking to herself, telling the machines about her loneliness and fear. "You are my only friends," she whispered to the silent engines. "You don't judge me or hurt me. You just want to work right, like I just want to belong somewhere." The millionaire, who had stayed working late, heard this one-sided conversation through the half-open door. His heart ached as he realized the depth of the pain the child carried. For the first time since his wife's death 5 years earlier, he felt an emotional responsibility that went beyond business. The next morning, the first serious sabotage happened. The girl arrived to find one of the main machines completely disassembled, its parts scattered across the floor in a deliberate disarray. An anonymous note was taped to the workbench. "Show us what you can do now, brat." Tears streamed down the girl's dirty face as she looked at the destruction. She knew it wasn't an accident. She knew someone had deliberately sabotaged her work to humiliate her. But instead of giving up, something fierce awakened in her fragile chest. If they wanted to test her, she would show them what she was truly capable of. She worked alone for 12 straight hours, without breaks for food or rest. Her small hands bled from the effort, but she persisted with a determination that impressed even her detractors. When she finished, the machine not only worked, but operated with 30% greater efficiency than the original. The millionaire found her passed out from exhaustion on the repaired machine the next morning. At that moment, observing the child's fragile body and seeing the extraordinary work she had done alone, he understood 2 fundamental things. First, that he had grossly underestimated both her knowledge and her courage. Second, that he was allowing a terrible injustice to happen under his roof. He carried the unconscious girl to his office, where she awoke hours later on a comfortable couch, covered by a soft blanket. It was the first time in months she had felt genuine warmth and security. When she opened her eyes and saw the millionaire watching her with concern, a weak but genuine smile lit up her bruised face. "The machine is working," she whispered, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "I promised I would fix it, so I fixed it." At that moment, the businessman made a decision that would change the course of everything. He would no longer allow this extraordinary child to be tormented by small and envious men. It was time to find out the truth about her past and protect her properly. But what he didn't know was that the former fired manager had crossed a dangerous line. Consumed by rage and humiliation, the man was planning a sabotage that would put the girl's life in real danger, determined to prove that she was a fake, even if it cost him everything. The discovery came on a cold Tuesday morning when the millionaire finally gained access to the complete records of the old demolished workshop. What he found in the dusty archives completely changed his understanding of the girl and the dark past of his own family. The inventor was not just his father's former partner. He was the true genius behind the first patents that established the family empire. Documents revealed that the man had developed revolutionary mechanical engineering techniques, methods that made engines 40% more efficient and durable. But in a cruel power play, the millionaire's father had used legal loopholes to steal these patents, expelling the inventor from the partnership without a cent. What shocked him most was discovering that the inventor had spent the last years of his life caring for an abandoned child in the ruins of his workshop. Neighbors reported seeing the old man teaching the girl to read using complex technical manuals, turning her into a kind of engineering prodigy through unconventional methods of education. While processing these devastating revelations in his luxurious office, a deafening alarm began to sound throughout the factory. Red lights flashed frantically in the corridors as an electronic voice announced, "Immediate evacuation, risk of explosion in Sector 3. All employees must leave the building immediately." Chaos ensued instantly. Hundreds of workers ran towards the emergency exits, pushing and screaming in panic. The ventilation system had failed in the sector where flammable chemicals were stored, creating a volatile mixture that could explode at any moment. The temperature was rising rapidly, and any spark would be enough to turn the entire area into a fireball. From his office, the millionaire watched in horror as everyone abandoned the building. His fortune in investments and applications meant nothing if he lost the entire factory. Decades of family work would be destroyed in a matter of minutes. He was about to evacuate when he realized something that made his blood run cold. The girl was not among those fleeing. In a desperate search, he located her through the security cameras still in Sector 3, working frantically on a control panel that not even the most experienced engineers knew how to operate. Her small hands moved with impossible speed between wires and circuits, as if she were disarming a bomb. "Get out of there immediately!" he shouted into the intercom. But she didn't answer. She was completely focused, sweat running down her small face as she raced against time. The temperature in the sector had exceeded the critical limit, and the machines began to make dangerous noises that indicated imminent failure. Outside, in the parking lot where everyone had gathered, the former fired manager watched the scene with a cruel smile on his lips. He was the one who had sabotaged the ventilation system during the night, planning to cause an accident that would be attributed to the girl's incompetence. His plan was that she would be held responsible for the disaster, finally proving that she was a threat to the company. But what he hadn't calculated was that she actually knew a way to reverse the situation. In the inventor's old manuals, there were diagrams of an extremely complex emergency procedure that required specific knowledge of chemical interactions and pressure systems. It was a technique that only someone with access to the old genius's secrets could execute. Inside Sector 3, the girl was working in a precise sequence that she had memorized years ago, when the inventor had taught her about industrial safety systems. Each wire had to be reconnected in a specific order, each valve adjusted with millimeter precision. A mistake would mean not only her own demise, but the destruction of the entire factory. Her small hands trembled not from fear, but from extreme concentration. Tears mixed with sweat streamed down her face as she worked, but her mind remained focused on the impossible task. It was as if the inventor's voice guided her through each movement, whispering instructions that only she could hear. The millionaire watched everything from the cameras, helpless and desperate. He had called the fire department, but they wouldn't arrive in time. The only hope of saving his family business and the life of the courageous child depended entirely on the impossible skills of that 4-year-old girl. With 5 minutes remaining before the inevitable explosion, she reached the last component of the system, a main valve that controlled all the pressure in the sector, located at a height she could barely reach. She climbed onto a stack of unstable boxes, stretching her small arms to the limit, while the heat became almost unbearable. It was then that the unthinkable happened. At the exact moment when she managed to turn the final valve, the entire system stabilized. The red lights stopped flashing, the alarms silenced, and the temperature began to drop gradually. The girl had managed to reverse a disaster that would have destroyed not only the factory but possibly human lives. She collapsed on the floor, exhausted and hurt by the extreme heat. Her hands were burned by the overheated wires, and her breathing was labored due to the chemical fumes she had inhaled. But a faint smile lit up her face when she saw that she had managed to save everything. The millionaire was the first to enter the sector after the stabilization, finding her semi-conscious on the floor. He carried her in his arms as if she were the most precious thing in the world, finally understanding that this child was not only talented, she was extraordinary in a way that defied all logic. "Why did you do it?" he asked, looking at the burns on her small hands. "Why did you risk your life to save the company of people who treat you badly?" Her answer, spoken in a weak but determined voice, touched his heart in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "Because you gave me a chance when no one else would. And because the machines here are like a family to me, I couldn't let them be destroyed." At that moment, as he held the injured child in his arms, the millionaire made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He would not only protect that extraordinary girl, but discover the whole truth about her past and bring justice for the crimes committed against the inventor who had raised her. What he didn't know was that the ex-manager, upon seeing his sabotage plan fail, was planning something even more sinister to take revenge on the child who had ruined his life. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.